And we shouldn't have to convince people our value. We shouldn't have to have them debate if we are worth it. And I feel like so many times in my life and so many times in other people's lives, they're kind of clinging on to people and pouring so much effort into things just to kind of get out of it, when we have to realize that that's not actually what it's supposed to be. Now it's no longer genuine or no longer real because, we're doing so much more than our partner. We're doing so much more in this sense because we are trying to prove that we are worth it. We're trying to prove that we can have this companionship and we're capable of this for other people, when we have to accept that if they don't want us, we can't force this thing. Even if we're doing everything right or we're setting all the right signs that we want this person, when someone chooses to ignore it or not value it, there's nothing we can do from there. There's nothing, and we kind of just have to accept that in a sense. You shouldn't have to debate this or convince people. Your value isn't something that you have to debate or convince people for. If you had something in your hand that you knew was valuable and you knew was worth so much, and you try to convince someone for it and they said no, you're not supposed to beg this person to see it. You're not supposed to beg this person to value it and see it the same way you do. You have to be aware of its value and take it for yourself. You have to move on in this sense and realize that if they can't appreciate it, then there's nothing more for you to do. Even if you're doing everything right for someone, doesn't mean they'll do you right in the end. And I feel like a lot of times we're trying so hard to find this connection, we're trying so hard to build this thing, that it becomes so unstable. Now this person is even diminishing your value in your head because they're seeing how desperate you're becoming. They're seeing how easily they can be walking over you and disrespecting you. It's definitely important to realize that that level of respect has to be above our feelings. Just because we feel so much for this person or we want so much for this person, if they don't want us in the end, there's nothing we can do about it. And that's just kind of something we have to accept. We have to be aware of this, that this person is moving on and choosing to not value us. They're choosing to not pick you time and time again. And I feel like when we are letting people determine this for us, letting people determine our worth, that is what's damaging us in the long run. Because now this deteriorated worth that we have for ourselves is something that no one's going to value. Now we're not even looking out for ourselves. We feel so lost in this sense, And I feel like when we're putting so much pressure on ourselves to let people see this, to let people value it, now it's becoming less and less and less. And I feel like this is kind of the same thing when we're living to people's expectations of us. We have to be living for ourselves in the same way, since I feel like we determine our own value, and now that value is something that we can communicate with others. And if they can't appreciate it, then we have to move on. When we start to take a real look at ourselves, that's what it means. That's what it means to accurately assess ourselves and see if this is not even worth our time. Your time should be valued. And same with your emotions. Your emotions have that. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. Your emotions have so much value. And when we allow people to take this valuable thing from us, we're allowing this person to now invest themselves. We're now being dependent on how this person makes us feel. And we're letting that determine if we have a good day or not. We're letting how someone text us or how someone talks to us this day determine our overall mood. And we have to realize that we're now letting our emotions be so cheap. We have to let these things be expensive in our life. We have to let how we let other people control us not be something so major. We have to be so aware that when we are trying to have better connections or we are trying to be better for ourselves, we're not allowing these little things to deteriorate from us. When these things are now controlling you or now being something that determines your overall mood, we're now taking this person, for who they are. We're now letting them destruct us. And I feel like in that sense, we have to be more independent. We have to be more aware of this. When we are letting people kind of take this part of us, we're now, taking our emotions out. We're not actually realizing how we feel in this sense. And I feel like if we want to have better connections, if we want to have kind of something more for ourselves, that value that we're trying so hard to get people to see is just something that's just there. It's not really something we have to shove into someone's face and say, hey, look at this, value this, love and cherish this thing. And that thing being you. And I feel like it's a lot easier said than done, being able to move on in these situations or being able to accept that this person isn't pouring as much into you that you're pouring into them. We have to realize, it's kind of just letting go. And letting go is definitely hard, and it's something that I feel like so many people struggle with. It's something I've struggled with my whole life. But we have to realize how much time we're wasting. How much time and energy you're now letting other people control for you will definitely reflect back on yourself. And people aren't letting that get to them. We have to stop watering dead plants. When we're pouring so much into people that don't value it or don't care for it, we have to realize that we're now wasting this energy. There is no such thing as wasting love, but there is effort that we're putting in. There is effort that we could be using back into ourselves or back into people that are actually reciprocating these things for us, instead of wasting it on someone who couldn't see the value or decides not to. We should have this own love for ourselves. When we are kind of pouring this energy into these things, we have to realize that we have to pour into the things that pour back into us. If we are getting this kind of even exchange of growth or even exchange of love or support or whatever that thing may be, we are now allowing it to transcend us. Instead of feeling like we're pouring so much effort into this on, we have to realize that someone's lack of appreciation isn't a reason for you to try harder. This isn't a subliminal message that says, hey, give me more effort or give me more attention or give me this. We have to realize that if they can't appreciate the small things, then they won't appreciate anything bigger in the future. They won't appreciate you going head over heels for this person just because we feel like these small things aren't doing anything for them. That's damaging yourself. You're kind of chasing this rabbit's tail, and it's not really going anywhere. We have to have this own value for ourselves before we let other people determine it for us. And I feel like when we are finding our own value and when we are being aware of how we feel, that worth that's kind of designated in our head is something we have to stay with. If someone's kind of controlling these things for you or kind of making these things up, we have to realize that everything you're doing is supposed to be for you. That love, that effort, everything that you pour into and kind of want to change and want to persevere is important. And I feel like I've struggled with this a long time of trying to debate and convince people that I'm worth this time, that I'm worth this amount of distance, that I'm worth this amount of love or this amount of effort. And in that same sense, the only thing I've gained is now seeing my worth as those people see it. When we're letting people kind of be so harsh on us, we have to stop doing it. We are already our own worst critic, and no one will ever understand us the way we understand ourselves. But as soon as we start letting other people try to see that or try to determine that thing and kind of put you on this scale of you're worth about this much, we let that determine how we feel. And now we have this idea that maybe we are worth this little. Maybe in my head I'm not actually right about how I should feel or how confident or how loving I should be. Instead, we're letting this person now determine this thing. And I think when we fall off with that, that's the biggest damage. That is the thing that now destroys us in the future. We have to just pour more love into ourselves. That love that we're wishing to see, that we're dying to see, is something that's going around us every single day, and we're being so ungrateful with and taking for granted. We have to realize that we are valuable. Wherever you go, you have value. Because you've instilled these things into yourself, because you've poured these things into yourself, you are valuable. And we can't let people determine that for us. We can't let people have this idea of maybe I'm not this, maybe I'm not that. What you bring to the table and what you offer, and even your urgency to let someone depend on you, to let someone sacrifice and for you to change, speaks volume. And we shouldn't be forgetting this. We shouldn't let this thing kind of gloss over on our head and act like it doesn't exist. You have that. You are worth it. You are valuable, And I think that's what everyone has to instill in this. As soon as you have to convince or go out of your way for someone, it's time to leave. It's time to accept it, move on, throw it away. But it's time to know that we have that value. We are worth it.